Welcome to Magic Arcanum. I'm Ryan Gomez. Behind the scenes is Nicole Burdick, and we're so glad you're here because it's story time! Innistrad Crimson Vow continues the plot started with Midnight Hunt, which makes this an awkward time to join the game because it is assumed you already know what's going on. But it's okay if you don't. That's why I'm here. We're going to cover what's happening in Magic's newest set, Crimson Vow, just like we already looked at what happened in Midnight Hunt, which I strongly suggest you watch if you haven't already. As is often the case, there is some degree of mismatch between the story spotlight cards found within the set and the text of the story chapters published online. In those cases, I usually refer to the cards as being the final word, because those are something most players will actually see. Either way, we're going to open up with Blood Tithe Harvester, which sets the stage for everything that follows in Crimson Vow. Olivia Voldaren has issued a decree. Each citizen of Stensia must fill a small bowl with their own blood every night from now until the festivities. Anyone who doesn't will face grave consequences. And I can't help it, guys. It's Innistrad. The puns just write themselves. The event she's stocking up for is actually her own wedding, for which invitations are also being sent out across the plane. She plans to marry Edgar Markov, the grandfather of Sorin and the first vampire of Innistrad. This would greatly increase Olivia's political power and status, which doesn't bode well for the humans who are already suffering under the Eternal Night. Still, rebellion grows in that darkness, and the heroes of our story are making their own plans for Olivia's big day. Teferi, Chandra, Kaya, Arlinn, and their assembled allies realize they need help from the plane's true guardian, Sorin, if they are going to have any hope of reclaiming the Moonsilver Key and unlocking the power of the Celestis. So they head back over to Markov Manor to make their case, just as Sorin gets his invitation to the wedding and realizes he does still care about the plane and certainly doesn't want Olivia to be the one in charge of it. Collectively, they all decide to crash this wedding. We then get a scene set within the halls of the Voldaren estate, where the party is now in full swing. Present are members of all the vampire houses, including Henrika Domnathi, who kills another vampire named Relio for implying that the Domnathi don't deserve to be mingling with the Voldarens. So yeah, it's a bloody and somewhat chaotic affair, and that's before Olivia herself enters, dressed in her wedding gown, accompanied by servants carrying Edgar's coffin. Back outside, Sorin and the others reach the front gates and discover they won't all be able to pass through. The event is by invitation only, which is another story spotlight card. Magical barriers protect the grounds around the Voldaren estate, and so only Sorin himself is able to approach, leaving the rest to wait outside. For the impatient and impulsive Chandra, this is especially annoying. Anyway, we follow Sorin inside, where his internal monologue does a great job showing us how hard he's working to restrain himself. More than once, he thinks about killing the closest party guest, just to make his displeasure known, but he realizes he's too old and tired to go making scenes like that anymore. And brother, I can relate. So instead, he approaches Olivia and watches as she slits her own wrist to dribble blood into Edgar's coffin. We then learn a little bit about how this all works. Edgar is known to slumber in his coffin, and over the years, Sorin has woken him up periodically for advice or discussion about events on the plane. However, awakening from this slumber requires fresh blood, and that blood will carry some of the emotions and energies of the donor. Sorin was always careful about his emotional state when providing his own blood to awaken his grandfather. But now Olivia is pouring her own, let's say ambitious blood, right into Edgar's mouth. Sorin realizes this is going to immediately affect his grandfather's mind. Olivia will have some degree of influence over Edgar before he can even understand he's been dragged into a wedding as the intended groom. So sure enough, Edgar wakes up and Sorin tries to talk to him, but he's immediately smitten with Olivia and scolds Sorin for attempting to ruin the festivities. Alright, being reasonable isn't going to work. Maybe violence? Nope. The overwhelming number of guards present are able to hold Sorin down, even after he kills a bunch of them. Olivia then continues to humiliate Sorin by waking other members of his family, all stolen from the lower levels of his home and transported here to the Voldaren estate in a supreme display of her power. It gets worse. Olivia reveals the centerpiece of her ceremonial decorations and her gift to Edgar. Suspended up in the rafters is Sigarda, the angel, tightly bound and already showing wounds from her struggle. Sorin realizes Olivia's plan is to drain the angel's blood, and in doing so, she will gain control over all of the angels of Innistrad. The stolen moonsilver key, which is bowl-shaped, is going to be a crucial part of the exsanguination ritual. A ritual Sorin has witnessed before, actually. We learn that Edgar drained an angel like this centuries ago and used her blood to create the first line of vampires on the plane, Sorin among them. So, as Olivia and Edgar recite their crimson vows, Sorin decides enough is enough, and in a masterful display of his own sanguine powers, he turns the collected blood into a blade and uses it to free himself from the guards. He takes one of the slain guards' ceremonial swords and heads straight for Olivia, but his grandfather gets in the way, and before Sorin can act, Catilda's spirit comes streaming out of the moonsilver key. Olivia is furious and asks, "Who invited you?" To which Catilda calmly replies, "You did," which is actually true, and therefore hilarious. Anyway, Catilda surveys the scene and notices the bound Sigarda. Sorin attacks Olivia again to keep her away from Catilda, which gives her time to free the angel. Sigarda wastes no time in declaring every present vampire guilty, and then even Sorin is super impressed with how well she's filling the shoes of Avacyn. He's even glad he didn't make Sigarda, because he admits he wouldn't have thought to fill her with so much righteous fury. So Sigarda goes off, which immediately shatters the magical barriers on the outside of the Voldaren estate, and sends broken glass flying throughout the inside, making pincushions out of several unlucky vampires. Of course, still waiting outside are Chandra, Teferi, Kaya, Arlinn, and an assortment of soldiers, peasants, witches, and warlocks. When the barrier goes down, they all rush the estate, leaving the vampire guards dead in their wake. They get inside, and Kaya tells Arlinn they're not alone. She can feel the presence of a whole lot of angry ghosts in here. So she gets to work trying to free them from their tortured existence trapped in the twisted halls of the Voldaren estate. Arlinn, meanwhile, presses forward, seeking Olivia and, more importantly, the moonsilver key. First, she finds Sigarda, still fighting most of the vampires herself, which appears to be a deviation from the spotlight card Sigarda's summons. She doesn't have any other angels there to help her in the official story. She is tanking those vampires all on her own. Anyway, Arlinn does come up against Olivia just as the spirits begin to materialize and enter the fray, thanks to Kaya. The humans, now supported by the Geists, continue their assault against the vampires, and Olivia retreats through a passageway, with Arlinn giving chase. The story then cuts over to Sorin, who is in the middle of his own battle with Edgar. They're in the Sanguitorium, a room filled with barrels of blood in storage, and Edgar keeps flinging Sorin into the barrels, and then Sorin drinks their blood to recover his strength, which makes for a very interesting fight. Edgar's not trying to kill Sorin yet. He's mostly expressing his anger that Sorin has squandered his gifts. He says the vampires should be ruling Innistrad, and Sorin knows nothing of the sacrifices necessary to be strong enough to hold such power. Which is funny given everything we know about Sorin and his history, so of course Sorin isn't really hearing it, but he's also still losing this fight despite the constant influx of new blood, which should give you some idea of how strong Edgar really is. Just as Sorin gets knocked down again, we flip back over to Arlinn, who has finally cornered Olivia in an aptly named dead-end hallway. Guys, I tried to warn you. Now, so far, Arlinn has been doing everything in her human form. She has resisted the temptation to embrace her inner wolf, partly because she feels guilty about the damage Tovalar and the others caused at the Harvesttide Festival. Unfortunately, Olivia grabs a sword off of a nearby decorative suit of armor and uses it to overpower Arlinn. In desperation and encouraged by Olivia's taunts, Arlinn transforms, but Olivia is still able to best her, and things start to look grim for the Planeswalker. Fortunately, help is on the way down in the lower levels of the estate. Werewolves have shown up, adding their strength to the humans and Geists already holding their own against the remaining vampires. With the extra might of their furry allies, they're able to finally pull ahead in the battle, marking the true end of the festivities. Among those werewolves is in fact Tovalar, here now to help Arlinn, so he bounds off in her direction after the path is pointed out by Kaya. But first, we need to wrap up things with Sorin, who has consumed the last of the blood around him, and he has gone after his grandfather, who has returned to the ballroom and is holding off Teferi and Chandra. That is until Sorin joins the fight and quickly overwhelms Edgar. Sorin considers killing him outright, but feels compelled to stop just short. Internally, he thinks maybe it's the unseen hand of a long-gone angel that holds him back, perhaps a nod to the lasting influence of Avacyn. Nevertheless, Edgar flees, and the Gatewatch members offer their support and sympathy to Sorin. For once in his thousands of years life, Sorin just kinda accepts it and even says thank you. The story then moves back to Arlinn, who was knocked out on the floor until Tovalar comes and wakes her up. They form an uneasy truce, agreeing that tonight they will fight together against the vampires, and then they can settle their own issues with one another later. That's good enough for Arlinn, for now anyway, who goes back on the hunt for Olivia, now with her former mentor at her side. In just a short time, Olivia is located, along with Edgar, and the two are bickering like they're already actually married. The wolves make it clear that this all ends right now, and Olivia drops the Moonsilver key before flying out a nearby window, with Edgar right at her heels. Arlinn tells Tovalar she'll deal with him later, and takes the key back to her friends, who then all take the key back to the Kessig Forest to reunite it with the Sun Gold lock at the base of the Celestis. With all of the necessary parts, the Dawnheart Coven are able to finish the ritual started back in Midnight Hunt, and the supremely powerful magical artifacts are able to bring forth the glorious sunrise and literally save the day for Innistrad. And that's it. That's what happens in Crimson Vow, as told by the official story and most of the story spotlight cards found within the set. But if you're a fan of the show, you know we're not stopping here because we've still got the Mustache Minute. So get ready, because here we go. There's one more scene after the Celestis fires up, and that's all of the Planeswalkers saying goodbye and preparing to go their own way. Teferi takes the Moonsilver key with him, noting that it has interesting temporal properties, and he confesses to Arlinn that they have been having trouble around the multiverse. He even drops the name Phyrexians and warns Arlinn to be cautious. He promises to bring the key back, and Catilda says, yeah, that's fine, whatever. We don't really need it again for like 1,000 years. Which implies something like the Eternal Night is a recurring event and predates Emrakul's entanglement with the plane's moon, so apparently the Eldrazi weren't behind all of this. It's kinda unclear to me, but I'd love to hear your interpretations in the comments. Among these story spotlight cards, Sure Strike doesn't really happen in the story. Arlinn does adopt her werewolf form, but like I said, it was more because Olivia had the upper hand and she desperately needed some extra strength just to survive their fight. The art on Sure Strike makes it look like Arlinn was in control here, or caught Olivia unprepared, which was not how it went down. I am a little annoyed with Sigarda's summons because it takes away from the bravery of the humans. I think that whole ballroom fight feels a lot different if you add a bunch of angels overhead. I prefer the way it was written, where it's just Sigarda and the Wedding Crashers until they get some help from the Geists. I will point out, we don't know how Sigarda got captured by the vampires, and we don't know what happened to her at the end of this story. Presumably she's fine and continuing to grow in her role of Avacyn's replacement. I will also take a moment to confirm any of the named legendary creatures from this set that I didn't talk about did not appear in this main story, but there are 4 side stories this time around, which I may cover in a future video. Overall, I really liked this story. It was one of the best written in recent memory, with Sorin being a surprisingly compelling character who shows a lot of growth in how he deals with his feelings towards his own grandfather and his acceptance of the Gatewatch. To be clear, he's not a member of the Gatewatch. He just acknowledges that Teferi is also old and wise and maybe has seen some stuff Sorin hasn't, and he even finds Chandra's compassion to be tolerable after giving up on the rest of his own real family. Plus, there's this part where he picks up the guard's ceremonial sword, and he's like, "What? This is a terrible weapon. It's unbalanced. It's covered in gold and jewels. It's so gaudy. It's hideous. It's perfect for killing Olivia." In the end, though, Olivia and Edgar are still alive, although without the resources of the Voldaran estate. That might factor into events for our next visit to the plane, or maybe we'll see a multiverse-wide war with the Phyrexians. Crimson Vow left a lot of doors open, and I'm excited to see where we go from here, but I also want to hear what you think. Will the Phyrexians invade the plane? Will Sorin take some time away from brooding and get back to exploring the multiverse? Will Sigarda start wearing black eyeliner? Let me know down in the comments. Then make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the great stories you'll only find here on Magic Arcanum. We'll see ya.